Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. The topic of discussion is on navigating biases and their resulting barriers. We will be discussing ways to identify and understand implicit bias, microaggressions, and also knowing what intersectionality is. Whether the bias results in poor morale or discrimination, the first thing to do is identify these biases. We'll also address insecurities that result from bias and feeling like a minoritized person at work, in your community, or even on social media. The first question here is, what is implicit bias? Implicit bias refers to sometimes unconscious attitudes or stereotypes that affect our actions and decisions for or against a particular person or group. We may explicitly endorse certain values such as inclusivity, but may hold an unconscious bias that doesn't align with these values. And the thing to note here is that implicit bias stems from various stereotypes or fears that can also lead to prejudice, discrimination, or negative attitudes. Everyone, yes, I said everyone carries bias. We each have a responsibility to be aware of when and why this might occur. The next question is, what are microaggressions? Microaggressions are defined as verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults to the target person or group, minoritized group. Microaggressions are often based on differences in skin color, ethnicity, religious belief, gender identity, or sexual orientation. And implicit bias can occur without face-to-face interaction, because every time you think about microaggression, implicit bias is always involved, right? So, for example, the choice of images or written spoken language that we use at work, in school, in social spaces, or even on social media can show our implicit bias, which leads to the display of microaggressions. And microaggressions are more likely to occur through passive remarks and actions. Another thing that comes to mind is when we think about microaggressions and the display of our implicit bias, think about the common isms and phobias that people display in the society. Ableism, directed to people who may exhibit or seem to show signs of mental or physical disabilities. Think about ageism, which is discrimination based on age. Think about classism, which is based on socioeconomic status. Colorism based on someone's skin complexion or skin tone. Think about cronyism. This happens every day in the labor market or in the workforce. Favoring people who are your friends, your family members, without even considering their qualification for that particular job or role that you're giving to them. Elitism is one of the isms. Ethnocentrism is also there, based on the belief that your culture is more superior to someone else's culture. And that's why you hear sometimes people use terms like barbaric, savage, and ghetto, because you assume that your own culture, be it your individual culture or your societal culture, you assume that it's better than someone else's culture. Think about homophobia, which is targeted to those who are attracted to members of their own gender. Think about racism. Think about religious prejudice, e.g. Islamophobia. Think about sexism, which is focused on someone's gender. Think about sizeism, which is focused on someone's weight. There's transphobia, there's xenophobia. And like I mentioned, microaggressions and our implicit bias are always shown through images or spoken words, or even sometimes our behaviors. And this is where the power of language comes in, because microaggressions are often communicated through language. So it is very, very important to pay attention to how we talk, especially in the workplace or other social institutions like classrooms, courtrooms, markets, the mall, and so on. The next question is, what is micro-invalidation? Because every day we hear about implicit bias, we hear about racism, we hear about microaggression. There's something also known as micro-invalidation. And micro-invalidation is a verbal statement that denies, negates, or undermines the realities of members of various target groups. For example, when a white person tells a person of color that racism doesn't exist, they are invalidating and denying the person of color's racial reality. Similarly, when someone tells a woman that she's being too sensitive, or even saying things like, oh, I think she's on a period, that itself is micro-invalidation. Or think about what people say to a member of LGBTQ community. You should stop complaining, That is you trying to invalidate the reality of discrimination that exists in the lives of these people. There's so many examples of microaggressions we see and experience every day in our society, in school, on social media, even at home, right? In our neighborhoods, we see these things happen all the time. So I'll give an example, 2 examples here. At work, calling your female boss crazy, hysterical, that itself has sexist undertones. And because these words have long problematic history, we are not supposed, or we are not even allowed to, call our female colleagues or even our female bosses crazy or hysterical. I'm Nigerian, so I'll give you an example. I'm Nigerian by nationality, and I know, like, back in history, Lord Lugard, who is a British administrator that ruled in Nigeria during colonial era, he called Nigerian women crazy, hysterical women when they challenged him, fighting for justice, fighting for fairness in Nigeria. So we have to think about the ways we use language to perpetrate violence and all these microaggressions we see every day. So there are so many ways that microaggressions are displayed in our society. I would just give 2 examples. The first one is assuming that you know someone's language or their racial identity based on their appearance. A lot of newcomers here in Canada who eventually transition into becoming Canadians, or sometimes children who are born here in Canada to immigrant parents. When they go to school or they go to work, people ask them, oh, where are you from? Because you assume that the person is not Canadian. So just be aware that itself is microaggression. So what should you do instead? Ask the person, do you speak any other language, or just say nothing? Another example of microaggression would be asking if someone's hair is real, or you touching somebody's hair without their permission. What should you do instead? Your hair looks nice. I like your new hairstyle today. Never touch anybody's hair without their permission, okay? Because when you do those type of things, touching their hair without their permission or making assumptions based on their experience, that is a display of microaggression. Now, the question is, how can you address implicit bias and microaggressions that you face every day in your society or even at work? It is very helpful to think about anti-bias strategies before you witness or even experience a microaggression. So say you are faced with microaggression at work. That moment, a bystander simply might not know what to do or how to help you. And on the other hand, as a target, you might feel very angry, you might feel very sad, you might feel really, really upset. And you find yourself asking, what just happened? That itself is a mix of emotions, and it can make you feel very, very upset and also make the entire situation difficult to respond. So we will be looking at ways that you can respond or you can address microaggressions and implicit biases at work from your co-workers, your employer, or even just people in your neighborhood or people at school or even people on social media. So consider a 3-step process. This 3-step process will assist you as an individual with how to react to a microaggression by asking the person or asking yourself, actually, did this microaggression really occur? Should I respond to this microaggression? How should I respond to this microaggression? Because the main thing is to think about your mental health, to think about your safety, to think about your security at that point. So What should you do exactly? The first step is identify the microaggression that just happened. State the microaggression to those involved, telling them how you felt, what you saw, what you heard. You can also do this respectfully and with the intent to objectively reflect what you witnessed rather than adding in your opinion about the intent of the microaggressor. You can call out the bias from the microaggressor by responding with statements like, "That's a stereotype. I don't believe it. I think what you just said was offensive because, you know." So whenever you find yourself in situation or in unsafe spaces where a microaggressor is saying something that is racist, sexist, ableist, make sure that you call out the bias. But before you do that, objectively reflect on what you just witnessed and call out the bias immediately, call out the microaggression immediately. But before you do this again, make sure that there are people around you. Make sure that there's a sort of security, because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where the microaggression turns into physical violence and then you don't feel safe at all. So this will lead us to why and when should you call out bias? Should you be calling out bias? Should you be calling out microaggression? Or should you call in bias or call in the microaggression? We'll be having a look at that. The next thing you want to do is apply implicit curiosity. This is one way you can actually address implicit bias and microaggression at work, because we all form prejudiced opinions regardless of our intelligence, our education, our socioeconomic status. But implicit curiosity may help us make wiser judgments. Curiosity has long been recognized as a common innate human characteristic, one that compels us to ask questions both implicitly or explicitly, seek knowledge, gain understanding, and also make appropriate decisions. Another question you should ask yourself is, should I respond to this microaggression? So if someone is certain or moderately certain that a microaggression did in fact occur, you can ponder the potential risk or consequences of responding or not responding to that microaggression. Here are some questions that you can ask yourself. If I respond, could my physical safety be in danger? If I respond, will the person become more defensive or more microaggressive, and will this lead to an argument? If I respond, how will this affect my relationship with this person? It could be your spouse, your family member, co-worker, a neighbor. If I don't respond, will I regret not saying something? If I don't respond, does that convey that I accept the behavior or statement? So consider this context. If the person committing the microaggression is someone you don't care about maintaining a relationship with, respond however you see fit if it seems safe to do so. But if the microaggressor is someone closely connected to you, you don't want to burn bridges by either calling them in or calling them out. Keep the initial conversation short and schedule a time to talk about it later to give the other person time to think things over. Remember, the reason why you'll be doing this is for your own mental health, for your own safety, right? Because you don't want to give someone the power to change your mood, or you don't want to give someone the power to make you feel less of yourself, regardless of whatever identifier that person may have used during the expression of that microaggression, right? Be sure to criticize the microaggressions when you speak to that person. Of course, you can also choose not to respond. If you decide to confront someone despite worries about repercussions, please always document things that have happened, especially at the workplace. Document things and also have witnesses. Another step towards addressing microaggressions at work, in your community or on social media, is reframe the narrative. Share why you think the exchange may be hurtful to some people or even to yourself. This is an opportunity for respectful dialogue. Give people the benefit of the doubt. They may not be aware of their own biases, and the person on the other hand may not have been offended in the least. So when you approach this as a conversation instead of an accusation, people are much less likely to become defensive. In this example, you might ask, why don't you believe their first response? So another thing you should have in mind is harmless anti-bias strategies that can help you address microaggression wherever you find yourself. If individuals do decide to take action, so put yourself in a situation where you just faced microaggression at work, at home, in your neighborhood, on social media, there are ways you will always contemplate how to react. First, approach the situation in a passive-aggressive way. For instance, perhaps the victims may make a joke or sarcastic comment as a way of communicating that they are upset or annoyed. So when someone displays microaggression towards you, you can make a joke or sarcastic comment, but that's you communicating that, you know what, I'm really upset, I'm annoyed, I don't like what you said, I do not appreciate what you just mentioned. Perhaps sometimes as the victims may respond by rolling their eyes or sighing. So you can make a body gesture communicating that you're not comfortable with what someone just said to you or what someone said publicly about you. Or you can also do nothing in that moment and decide to talk to other people about it first. So you might not confront the aggressor directly. You might decide that, okay, I'm going to talk about this with friends, family members, or even someone else. It could be other co-workers at work, in the hopes that it will get back to the perpetrator, right? The second thing is, as victims of microaggression, you can decide to respond or react in a proactive way. This might be effective when the victim simply does not have the energy to engage the perpetrator in a discussion. Sometimes individuals who experience microaggressions regularly may feel so agitated that they just want to yell back. So for some individuals, an active response may be a therapeutic way of releasing years or moments or hours or weeks of accumulated anger and frustration. The reason is because many microaggressors are people that you know, or they're in close proximity to you at work, in your neighborhood, and at home. And they've been doing all these things, making comments, making remarks towards you, and this has actually led to accumulated anger and frustration for some time. So one way you can actually handle this is to react in a very proactive way, because this itself is therapeutic for you. Finally, an individual may act or react to microaggression in an assertive way. You know, every time people say, you should set boundaries. Yes, it's so good to set boundaries. But one thing that many of us struggle to do is asserting those boundaries. So you set your boundaries, good. Then you also have to assert those boundaries. This may include calmly addressing the perpetrator or microaggressor about how they made you feel. This can also consist of educating the perpetrator or microaggressor. And let me just mention that you do not always have to educate a microaggressor, especially when that person is not willing to learn, when that person is not willing to be held accountable. Remember, you can always talk things to other people at work. You can always discuss it. Sometimes you can even go on social media and share your experience and then get to see what other people will suggest as better strategies to address microaggression when it comes from the same microaggressor or perpetrator. So oftentimes the perpetrator or microaggressor will become defensive. This is why I said some people are just not willing to unlearn or even learn. They become very defensive, and this may lead to further microaggressions, particularly microinvalidation. So it may be important to use I statements. I felt hurt, I felt sad when you said that, instead of attacking statements. You're racist, you're sexist. When you use attacking statements, the microaggressor will not be willing to change. They will become more defensive. They will want to have reasons to keep displaying those microaggressions towards you. So use the I statement, which shows that you are asserting how you feel and how you don't want that microaggression to keep happening next time. So always have it in mind that it is better to use I statements instead of attacking statements. It also may be important to address the behavior and not the microaggressor. What this means is that instead of calling the microaggressor a racist or a sexist, it might be best to say that the behavior that the person engaged in was racially charged or offensive, or was a sexist comment, a sexist behavior, and you find it very, very offensive. Take care of yourself. Microaggressions can be shocking and makes you think that you don't belong, makes you feel less of yourself. It makes you second guess your abilities. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you ask yourself questions. Do I really belong here? Do I deserve love? Do I deserve to be here? When there is no one around, it may be helpful to seek support from loved ones. I mentioned this earlier. Seek support from your loved ones, your friends. If it's something that happened at your workplace and you have co-workers who are allies, you can always talk to them about the microaggression you face from someone at work. For instance, with modern technology, people can easily call, text, email, or communicate with their social media networks about microaggression. We've seen a lot of social movements that started on Twitter. We've seen a lot of things that started on Instagram, on Facebook, So I myself have seen many people update their status on Twitter and Facebook describing microaggressions that happen to them on the subway, on the sidewalks, at work, in the neighborhood. So most of the time, people respond in supportive ways. And this is why I mentioned earlier that it is okay for you to share your experience on social media or talk to people around you that you can really, really confide in, and then get to listen to whatever anti-bias strategies or suggestions that they have that you can actually use in addressing microaggressions next time. So processing your emotion is also important because microaggressions have been known to lead to an array of mental health problems, including depression, anxiety, and trauma. So therefore, individuals who experience microaggressions may find it helpful and necessary to discuss their cognitive and emotional reactions with their loved ones or mental health professionals. In doing so, you may avoid accumulating negative and detrimental feelings, which may affect your mental health. One thing you should also keep in mind when navigating your workplace, especially when you've been exposed to microaggression, is opportunities that come, opportunities that are packaged as a sort of incentive for you, opportunities that are packaged in a way to make you feel good. The thing is, do not be fooled by microaggressions packaged as opportunities. Especially in the workplace, you will get opportunities to do XYZ task or duty or responsibility. But when you look at it with a very clear mind, you find out that those opportunities are actually microaggressions. So when a particular group isn't well represented in the community, at work, on campus, or anywhere else, well-intentioned authorities may keep turning on to the same members of that group to speak on panels. We've seen it happen like last year and even up till this moment. Minoritized groups, especially Black folks, are always invited to come and speak on panel. So the burden to keep educating microaggressors, the burden to keep educating perpetrators of all this violence, racial violence, the burden is on Black folks. The burden is on women to come speak on panels, educating men how to treat them and all of that, or how to serve on communities, or how to serve on committees, mentor other people in their own group. When this occurs, those opportunities are just doing what? Overloading the minoritized group, or overloading the minoritized person. It could be a minoritized student, it could be a minoritized worker, it could be a woman, it could be somebody who is coping with an emotional or cognitive disability. So people are always at work in your community. You're being given an opportunity. Come speak on this panel. Come do this. Come do that. Nobody really cares about how you feel, right? So what am I saying? Microaggressions can also be packaged as tokenism. So you have to be very, very careful with the kind of opportunities that you accept at work, with the kind of opportunities you accept in social spaces. While these opportunities can feel good to begin with, it's easy to become overwhelmed. So remember, microaggressions are not just direct expression of racial comments or slurs or even comments that dehumanize you. Microaggressions also come as packaged opportunities. Set realistic expectations of what you want from conversations with microaggressors. Think about, is this actually helping? If I hold this conversation with this person, is this helping? Will this cause me more harm? Is this conversation something that I want to really spend my energy discussing with this person? Is this a conversation that I view as being helpful in any way, shape, or form? So it's so important to acknowledge that no one is going to learn everything in one conversation overnight. So please set realistic expectations for yourself at work, in your neighborhood, when you come online. One thing I do is whenever I go on my Twitter, because I'm very active on my Twitter and my LinkedIn, on my Twitter, I had to mute some words because I don't want to be seeing conversations from people who are tweeting those words. I don't want to get triggered, right? So think about effective ways that you can set realistic expectations on discussing and addressing microaggression. Always be aware of yourself and your mental health, like I mentioned, when having these conversations with a microaggressor or microaggressors. In a world where we all fought for social justice all the time, we'll be getting into productive arguments and fights and having protests every day, changing laws, policies. But we don't, and we can't, because we are also human and we need to rest. So before you jump into conversations, especially conversations that are so overwhelming, or those microaggressions that are packaged as opportunities, think about your mental health. One thing that a lot of people should realize, especially minoritized people, is that the world has been designed in a way to stress our existence, and we do not want that. We don't want a situation where every day, every week, every month, or every year, it's one protest to another, one fight, one campaign. The world, the system, the systemic racism, the systemic structures, the systemic racist policies, these things are designed in a way to stress our human existence, and we do not want to give power to microaggressors. We do not want to give power to any racist system that has been designed to make us worry all the time, shout all the time, talk all the time, or get stressed all the time. So it is so important that we should be aware of ourselves and also learn strategies to distress. We do not have to always show up as heroes, as warriors, as fighters, because our life matters and we need to find time to take care of ourselves. The next thing is for bystanders and allies. When you notice microaggressions displayed towards a minoritized person or a minoritized group, the first thing you want to do is education. The better everyone understands the issue or the issues, the more they can avoid bias. Ask questions, especially of those who may experience implicit bias and microaggressions at work or in public spaces. Seek to understand their experiences. Pursue professional development opportunities that focus on inclusion. Don't just assume that, because you work with a Black person or because you work with a woman or because you work with a new immigrant, so you understand their lived experience. No, that's not how learning happens or how learning occurs. Ask questions, and not just asking questions that will trigger the next person. Ask questions that will make you learn more about their lived experiences. Ask questions because you want to be able to offer support and not to display a savior complex. This could be done privately with the person who spoke up, about a microaggression that they face, or as a general education opportunity with an entire team at work without singling anyone out. So say somebody faced a microaggression at work. For example, a Black person faces a microaggression at work, and you're having a discussion in a team meeting or a team group. Instead of singling out the person and say, "Oh, the other day Brenda was sad, she was crying because this happened to her, or this person said that to her." No, don't do that. Don't do that at all. Rather, make a general statement calling out the microaggression, calling out the implicit bias displayed by the microaggressor, call out the racism, call out the sexism, call out the ableism without singling out anyone. The next thing, as a bystander or ally, one thing you can do is be open to new, deeper ways of offering support to someone who has faced microaggression. As you gain greater understanding, leverage the understanding and leverage that new knowledge, leverage that new experience by putting it into providing support. Consider the unique challenges that minoritized people face. Consider the unique abilities that they have. Consider the differences. This could include race, class, gender, could include sexual orientation, it could include religious belief, right? You have to consider all of these things and understand their lived experiences. And in addition to what's already been discussed throughout this section, this may require an understanding of the impact of past trauma related to discrimination. So don't just make statement that, "Oh, this person is always angry, this person is always upset." Understand that a lot of people are also dealing with intergenerational trauma, right? Some people are also dealing with trauma from past violence in their relationship, or even trauma from war that they experienced in their home country, or even anything. It could be anything. Trauma from an accident that happened, trauma from an experience at their previous workplace. So understand that you cannot just judge people's moods or people's behaviors without understanding the trauma that they've faced in previous spaces, previous situations, or in their home country, or even in their family. So always be open to new, deeper ways of offering support as a bystander or as an ally. Do not display severe complex. Rather, ask the person who has faced the microaggression how they want to be helped, how they want to be supported, what you can do for them, right? And at the end of everything is have this in mind. Treat everyone with respect and dignity, irrespective of their skin color or skin tone, the way they speak, their education, their socioeconomic status, their body size, their body image, their gender, their sexual orientation or religious belief. Every human being deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. And as minoritized group of people, my suggestion will always be consider your mental health first and understand that nobody has the power to make you feel less of yourself, because your human existence matters. Your voice matters, your goals, your dreams, your aspiration, everything about you matters. And that's what you should keep in mind. And you also do not need to seek permission from anyone to exist. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today.